BR Proud presents a candid conversation on toxic towns, legacy of environmental racism. Now, your hosts, Jaron Jordan and Dion Guillory.
Good evening, I'm Dion Guillory.
And I'm Jaron Jordan. Tonight's episode of Candid Conversations has us cruising along the I-10 corridor here in South Louisiana, taking a look at the stretch of land along the Mississippi River that's been coined Cancer Alley. For years, residents in fence-line neighborhoods have been fighting the existence of chemical plants in the area as more plan to move in. Tonight, we're talking to the folks in St. James Parish about their ongoing battle with the proposed Formosa Plastics plant that's been making both national and international headlines.
When we leave there, we'll take you to a small town on Highway 61 just past Scotlandville, where folks in Alson are tired of having trash dumped in their backyard at the Ronaldson Field landfill. It's a stinky situation, and people say they are fed up from choking on heavily polluted air. This is Toxic Towns, a legacy of environmental racism. Joining us as we kick off the conversation in the fight for environmental equity is a woman who knows it inside and out. Dr. Beverly Wright is the executive director for the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Dr. Wright, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, now for those who may not know or understand, what is environmental racism?
Disproportionate exposure of environmental pollutants to people of color communities. And for us, it was initially African American communities, because that's who we were working with in what's called Cancer Alley. It was also the unequal protection that existed because of the inability to enforce laws and regulations that could, in fact, protect communities. That's the definition on its surface. But if you really want to see what environmental racism is looking at, in our own backyard, Cancer Alley, or the corporations like to call it the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor, but communities call it Cancer Alley because our cancer rates are so extremely high. We have some of the highest cancer rates in the nation. Of the top 10 cancers, Louisiana is first in 7 of the top 10 cancers. And as a survivor of breast cancer myself, during my treatment at MD Anderson, when I got to the hospital and they asked me where I was from, the nurses said, "Oh, we get a lot from down there." Now, when you're standing out at a hospital that is that huge, they are seeing so many people from Louisiana, you know that we have a problem. But even when I think about what environmental racism looked like for me in the early 90s, it was, in fact, communities living fence line to huge facilities such as Shell and Exxon. When I say fence line, I mean spitting distance from these huge pipelines that emitted cancerous emissions 24/7, low-level emissions, but through the pipes continuously. I saw communities whose window screens were rusting and falling off about every 3 months. You know, I saw communities with small white crosses on their front lawns to show the number of people in their homes who had died from cancer, the moss on the trees dying.
Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, you know, it is a community university model, so to say, partnership organization. What does that mean, and how does it help with environmental justice?
I began asking communities, what do you see as a problem, and what do you want fixed, and how do you think we should do it? And when I did that, I finally was able to get some grants funded that actually help communities in the way that they wanted to be helped, and provide community people with resources to do the work that we wanted them to do. So in a nutshell, that's the community model. And our center works from that position. Everything is bottom up. So we don't do anything that communities don't ask us to do. We don't try to answer any questions that communities don't agree with. And it's called a community model.
Mm-hmm. And I know when you mentioned, you know, working with the people in those communities, you've done some work with those people to where it helps them learn about what's happening around them, but also employing them as well. Talk about that.
Yes, well, that's interesting. Everything is connected in the work that I've done for almost 30 years. And so in working with communities to attend hearings and to advocate for themselves to get emissions reduction in the corridor, our communities were always very happy with the services that we presented, all the classes and connections. But I remember at one community, when we had finished fighting the battle that we were having, that one lady said to me, and her name was Miss West, and she was actually lives in St. James Parish. And she said, you know, Dr. Wright, we appreciate everything that you do, but when you leave, our community is still poor. Our young people don't have any jobs, and we really need to have jobs. And so the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences just happened to recognize that they needed a program that included minorities. And we were one of the first grantees of this program that's now been in existence for 25 years, where we train young men and women in hazardous waste, lead abatement, basic construction, green construction, and we're trying to move on into renewables so that we'll train young people to do things like solar panels and so on. And what that does is it actually allows communities who are devastated from environmental pollution, but also living in poverty, get an economic boost from working to clean up their own communities. And not only that, travel the United States, helping other communities to be clean.
Yeah. Dr. Wright, thank you for joining us, and you just shared some very good information that, of course, will help in the fight for environmental equity. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Coming up, folks down the river in St. James Parish have some serious concerns over another chemical plant planning to move into the area. The White House and the United Nations now weighing in, demanding calls for environmental justice.
You're watching a BR Proud presentation, a candid conversation on toxic towns, legacy of environmental racism.
Have you ever thought about what you see when you look out your back door? People living in St. James Parish believe what they see is harming them. They live in an area that was once known as plantation country. Now they say it's the petrochemical corridor keeping them just as disenfranchised as their slave ancestors, and they're determined not to give up their fight. Nestled along the banks of the mighty Mississippi River, just about 40 miles south of Baton Rouge, is St. James Parish.
We had everything in St. James. We were living a life of Raleigh. We had everything. We had pecan trees. We had fruit trees. We plant gardens.
Sharon Levine is a lifelong resident.
We can't do that anymore. Our pecan trees, they barely bear. Our fruit trees die. Whenever we plant the fruit trees, they die.
Levine spent more than 30 years in the classroom as a teacher in St. James. Now, her mission is to help educate the world about what she believes is the very thing killing the only home she's ever known.
The emissions from all these chemical plants are killing our trees. You know, if they're killing the trees, they're killing us too. So this is home. There's no place like home. And this is where we want to stay.
Levine is the founder and president of Rise St. James, an organization formed in 2018 after Formosa Plastics Group announced they had selected St. James Parish to build their $9.4 billion manufacturing complex.
They need to stop permitting all these chemical plants to come into Louisiana, especially in St. James in the 5th District. Put it in their community if it's so good and they want to be polluted, put it in their community. Don't put it in St. James. We are tired and we're not taking anymore.
Formosa is permitted to emit more than 800 tons of hazardous air pollutants each year, which the Centers for Biological Diversity says doubles the emissions in St. James and more than triples the levels of cancer-causing chemicals in the region.
It's in our poor black community. That's racism. That's genocide. That's environmental racism. And I'll stand on it.
When you say racism, to me, it implies that someone has singled out a race of people to attack or to disadvantage, and that's not what's happening.
Greg Bowser is the head of the Louisiana Chemical Association.
There may be a cancer alley, it's just not here.
He disputes any link between the region's industry emissions and harmful health conditions like cancer.
Well, the thing of it is that you don't have that data out there. We talk about the data and we reference the data from the tumor registry and from other places that you can see that. But people who say, well, this is Cancer Alley, they don't quote any data to you. It's just what they say it is. For example, the White House said that.
Environmental justice will be at the center of all we do addressing the disproportionate health and environmental and economic impacts on communities of color, so-called fence line communities, especially those communities, brown, black, Native American, poor whites. It's hard, the hard-hit areas like Cancer Alley in Louisiana.
We reached out to them and said, listen, we don't think there's any data to prove that. If there is, send it to us. I haven't gotten it. And so when somebody mentions that, ask them for the data. I think that's the best thing to do.
The burden of proof should not be on a community to demonstrate that they're not going to get sick and die from a plant that releases things that are known to cause cancer and other health problems.
Dr. Kimberly Terrell works at the Tulane University Environmental Law Clinic. Last fall, she authored Air Pollution and COVID-19, a double whammy for African American and impoverished communities in Cancer Alley.
What we found was pretty consistent with what we've been hearing from the communities that we work with, and that's that African American and low-income communities in Louisiana are overburdened not just with poverty, but also with pollution and with COVID-19.
While the Louisiana Chemical Association sources data from the Tumor Registry, which does not measure the health effects related to air pollution, the Environmental Protection Agency does. In their most recent National Air Toxics Assessment, Louisiana led in the total risk of cancer per million from pollutants, the most concentrated area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge.
The Environmental Protection Agency monitors air pollution across the country. And if you look at their data, it's pretty clear that Cancer Alley exists, and it's a place where people are put at higher cancer risk from toxic air pollution. And that's really irrefutable.
The chemicals that I'm breathing cause me to have autoimmune hepatitis. The chemicals that I'm breathing in the water that I was drinking for years, I have aluminum in my body. People around here have cancer. The worst thing that they have around here is cancer. Some of them have asthma, different illnesses. But these chemical plants over decades have been causing illnesses in our communities. So it will stop. Formosa is to stop. They will not be built here.
The groups who say refineries ought to go away or chemical plants ought to go away, they never showed up to talk about how do I replace that? How do you make your mortgage payment until that green job shows up? And that plan hadn't come out yet.
And the United Nations has also weighed in on this, issuing a statement that reads in part, quote, "This form of environmental racism poses serious and disproportionate threats, including the right to equality and non-discrimination, the right to life, the right to health, an adequate standard of living and cultural rights," end quote. Now, we did reach out to Governor John Bel Edwards and Senators Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy with interview requests. None of those requests were returned, though I did have the chance to speak with the former congressman who represented parts of this district in Washington. Cedric Richmond currently serves as President Joe Biden's senior advisor and the director of the White House Office of Public Engagement. Here's what he had to say about Cancer Alley and environmental justice.
The name, let's start there. I think the people who live in those communities, those fence line communities that border our chemical plants and our refineries, I think that they do adopt the name. And I think they have a real concern about environmental justice and cancer rates. And I think that President Biden, I know that President Biden is concerned about it. Environmental justice was a big part of his plan when he ran for president. And he's doing everything he said he would do. No, we're not running from the fact that there are real concerns about environmental justice around in between New Orleans and Baton Rouge.
And still ahead, we continue this candid conversation, diving deeper into that Tulane Environmental Law Clinic study with Dr. Kimberly Terrell. We're looking into Louisiana's health data monitoring, plus why she says the residents of St. James Parish have justice on their side.
It's time to find an amazingly low interest rate for your home loan with no origination fees. It's time to close fast. It's time to meet Philo. Amazingly low and fast and low. Introducing Philo Mortgage. Philo Mortgage is so certain of providing you a low rate with no origination fees that we created the Philo Low Rate Guarantee. If you find a lower rate with no origination fees for a purchase or new refinance, we'll match it and pay you $1,000 at closing. Yes, you heard that correctly. And yeah, we get that a lot.
Philo!
What about fees, you ask? Well, we skip those pesky fees. No origination fees and no hidden fees. This pooch doesn't even charge points. Just think of what you could do with the savings.
Good job, Philo, good job.
Find your lower rate at philomortgage.com or by calling the number below.
I love you, Philo.
At College Family Dentistry, there is always a reason to smile. We're making every day a little brighter with our Whitening for Life program. College Family Dentistry has you covered with appointment options until 7 p.m. and our discount dental plan. For the best dental care for your entire family, book now at collegefamilydentistry.com.
Joining us now is Dr. Kimberly Terrell from the Environmental Law Clinic at Tulane University. Just last fall, she was the author on record for an expansive study titled Air Pollution and COVID-19, a double whammy for African American and impoverished communities in Cancer Alley. So Dr. Terrell, thank you so much for being with us. I want to start with this study. It was very expansive, very detailed. Can you give us some of the key takeaways, the key findings in this overall study?
There is a lack of health outcome data in our state. So for example, we don't have good data about asthma. We don't have good data about COPD. We do have good data about cancer, but if you want to understand the relationship between health and pollution, you need to measure health and pollution. And so all of the, supposed controversy around Cancer Alley centers on, looking at health outcomes, looking at cancer, without actually measuring the pollution that people are being exposed to. Because not every person in St. James Parish is exposed to the same amount of pollution. And so that relationship between pollution and health outcomes, again, you need to measure both things if you want to understand the relationship. And so the best available data we have is from the Environmental Protection Agency, because what that agency does is they track the amount of pollution that's released into the air. They look at what we know about the science, the health impacts of those pollutants, and they say, based on the science, this is how much risk we expect those pollutants are burdening different communities with. And again, we know that that risk is hugely disproportionate in Cancer Alley.
Residents there in St. James Parish do not want more industry coming into the area. They say that it's just harmful. Industry, on the other hand, says that it's not harmful. And based off of the results of your study, what is the solution here?
So the solution is to protect people from being exposed to toxic air pollution and to particulate air pollution. The solution is to ensure that people breathe clean air. According to the CDC, there is no safe level of exposure to a cancer-causing pollutant.
And is there data that shows that there are those cancer-causing pollutants in this area between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that we're talking about?
Yes. So these plants, and for example, the Formosa plant that the residents in St. James are opposed to, are permitted to release cancer-causing pollutants. So it's not like we have zero basis to think that there could be health effects from these plants. The whole reason they're regulated is because these pollutants are known to cause health problems. If they weren't, these plants wouldn't need a permit. You don't need a permit to release water vapor into the air. The fact that they have to go through these permitting processes reflects the fact that they are releasing dangerous substances into the environment. And there's no reason to think that people are not going to be exposed to something that you're putting out into the air by the tons per year from one particular facility.
Just so interesting to me because I talked with the chairman of the Louisiana Chemical Association, Greg Bowser, who says, they work with all of their chemical plants, all members across the state, to make sure that they are doing everything that they should be doing by DEQ standards, by EPA standards, and that this idea that there are plants here that are causing some type of pollutants, that are causing sickness, and that are disproportionately impacting communities, poorer communities, is just not the case. What would your response be to that?
So my response is you can't use the lack of data as evidence that something is safe. When Zika virus first appeared, people took precautions. Pregnant women didn't travel because the health effects weren't known and weren't understood. And so if you don't measure people's asthma in St. James, and if you don't measure cancer and relate it to pollution exposure, you'll say, well, there's no evidence of a relationship. Well, you haven't actually looked at that relationship. And we need to look at the best evidence we have and the best available data we have. And that evidence indicates that when people are exposed to carcinogens, they face an increased risk of developing cancer. And there is no reason to think that the people of St. James are somehow immune to a relationship that holds true everywhere else in the world.
Dr. Kimberly Terrell from the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, residents along Highway 61 in Alson say there's a smelly situation going on. Why the community is fed up with constant dumping in their backyards.
Now's the time to spring into savings during the Team Automotive Upgrade event. It's the perfect time to shop over 1,500 new and quality pre-owned vehicles at any of our locations, with financing rates that could even lower your payments. Save thousands during the Team Automotive Upgrade event.
Are you ready to bring back Sunday services, backyard barbecues, stadiums full of fans and marching bands? Then don't wait. Vaccinate. 1 million Louisianans have gone sleeves up to bring back Louisiana. Get your free COVID-19 vaccine at the Bon Parade Business Center, at the LSU Football Stadium, or at the Mall of Louisiana. Walk in or schedule your vaccine appointment at 1-855-453-0774. It's safe, it's free, and it's the best way to get back to the Louisiana we know and love.
Why do billion-dollar insurance companies regularly delay and deny valid claims? Because that's how they got to be billion-dollar insurance companies. If you've been injured, I'd like to help.
Spencer Callahan is the one to see. Call 387-2323.
Now's the time to spring into savings during the Team Automotive Upgrade event. It's the perfect time to shop over 1,500 new and quality pre-owned vehicles at any of our locations, with financing rates that could even lower your payments. Save thousands during the Team Automotive Upgrade event.
So we've been talking about the fight against environmental racism during this episode, but it's been going on for decades. One of the oldest examples in the nation is in East Baton Rouge Parish, and it's a fight that continues today.
Welcome to Alson. This unincorporated community in East Baton Rouge Parish is west of Baker and southwest of Zachary. But the big draw is that it is just 2 miles off the Mississippi River, a big reason for industry and a landfill.
Years ago, I'm talking 30 years ago, I read something where industry said, going into many of these communities, we're very polite people, we're very faith-filled people, and we don't have the inclination to fight authority. In other words, we didn't empower ourselves to say no in many instances. They just kind of, after all, let's be honest, people are worrying about their jobs, they're worrying about their children, they're worrying about other issues. So sometimes thinking about the environment wasn't always something that they had the luxury to get involved in back then.
Mary Lee Orr is the executive director of LEAN, the Louisiana Environmental Action Network. The group has been fighting environmental racism in Alson for decades.
So it's not just, one segment of the population who is talking about this. It affects everybody.
It does. And I've been lucky enough to go into many Black communities, work with Hispanic people, Vietnamese people. So it's brown, Black, yellow, poor white people. It depends on where you are. It's a lot of economic, part of it is economics. You live in a poor area and this big industry comes in. But I feel like we have helped bridge that. We have discussions, we have this common issue. It brings us together, irregardless of whether, I'm a white woman, you're a Black woman, we're mothers, or we're community people. And we love where we live. We love our state. We don't want to be called the dumping ground of the world, right? Or someone said we're the Statue of Liberty of hazardous waste. What a horrible image, right?
I believe we've done and exhausted everything that we can do. But when we don't have that leadership on the state, and we don't have the leadership in the federal level that is pushing and keeping that information before policymakers, then we continue to fight and we continue to get forgotten.
Shauna Banks represents the area on the Metro Council. She says the permit for the Ronaldson Field landfill was approved in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic in an area she says people are fighting for their breath due to asthma and respiratory issues.
So the people that not only live in Alson, but children that are born in Alson or have comorbidities that make them more accessible to COVID-19. it's like an oxymoron that you're allowing people in that community to have these diseases, but put so much effort in stopping COVID-19 when something is foundationally wrong with that, and that's what we've been facing for many years.
What is it about those communities where this is happening?
You can get away with it.
Eugene Collins is the president of the Baton Rouge chapter of the NAACP. He says money generated by the very thing causing health issues doesn't seem to get put into the very community it affects.
You can get away with a plant that is obviously causing detrimental health effects on a nearby community if that community is black, and especially if that community is underserved, like you said, of a low socioeconomic status. When you factor in all those things, you can get away with stuff in poor communities that just wouldn't be allowed other places.
But there are policies that need to be changed at the state level in how people even apply for permit, and the weight that is given to the community on what comes in our community, what is permitted in our community. None of that is happening.
And as the fight continues for communities like Alson, the hope is that a new generation takes the baton while remembering those before them.
It's a really wonderful honor and privilege because I've buried, unfortunately, a lot of the leaders that I've worked with. And one of our leaders in Alson, if you don't mind me sharing this story, we talked about it a bit yesterday. He was a hunter, and he found a lot of tumors in the livers of the wildlife that he would shoot probably, and then fish that he would eat. And when he was dying, he looked at me and he said, "Mary Lee, promise that you'll tell my story, that my death won't be in vain, that there's something wrong here in this community." He died, he was about 52, 54. And I take that to heart with all our leaders, that those of us who are still left need to continue to tell their story and try to make this world a better place and safer to live in.
So what's next? Some say there needs to be a conversation for a buyout for the people of Alson to help them get out of the community many say is killing them. Now also, I just want to note that our calls to the landfill have yet to be returned. And for more information on the Ronaldson landfill, as well as any of the topics we've talked about on tonight's episode of Candid Conversations, all you have to do is just head on over to our website, brproud.com.
There you'll also find full in-depth interviews with all of our guests from tonight, and you'll find the full version of this show in case you missed any part of it. We've also got statements from the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Remember, it is so important to keep these candid conversations going, knowing that it is our responsibility to be a voice for the community. Thanks for being with us tonight. Have a good night.